Hello, everybody. It is a pleasure to see you. I am delighted that you're here to join me. It's been just a wonderful morning. I think you'll agree. We started with Rick Lewis this morning, um, tremendous conversation. Then we went to race as a corporate diversity mandate and how the landscape is shifting there. And then just now, work and life in Asia. We endeavor to ensure that all voices are heard globally. I think we're getting to that, and I think we're hearing about some really unique and interesting experiences. This I get to moderate, which I'm really excited about. Moving towards a post COVID business world, I have three tremendous guests. Naveen Balakrishnan, who is the COO and head of IB technology at TD Securities in Canada. Elizabeth Marengo, who is the senior vice president and global head of HR at Tronox Corporation in New York. And then last but certainly not least, Alan McKenzie, the CEO of JLL in Canada. All three of you, welcome. It's so good to have you. Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
So thank you. So I'm just as setting a frame for this conversation and how it came about for all of you who are watching. We were thinking about all of the things that are happening around us as we think about moving back into work. We're thinking about, the challenges around health, safety, coming back into the office, return to office, hybrid. How much do we do? How much do we not do? Real estate, all of the kinds of things as we think about work we have to consider. And so, I'm really excited to have these three, particularly. They sit across different industries, will come with very different perspectives. And I'm just going to leap right in. We're going to have a conversation. I think you'll be really impressed with this one. So, Elizabeth, I'd like to start with you, if I could. And that is, Tronox operates not just in offices, right? You operate plants. You're a chemical company. I'd like to really kind of dig into some of the things that you wouldn't have expected pre-pandemic that you had to think about as we moved into the pandemic and as we're kind of moving through the pandemic from an HR perspective, but also from a kind of more corporate strategy perspective.
Wow, that's a loaded question, but a good one that I think a lot of people are really still even trying to figure out today, to be honest with you. I think, when I reflect on our situation, and I've had the pleasure of actually kind of living through this crisis in two different companies. And I would say that just ways of working in general is probably one of the biggest obstacles and I would say, unique challenges that I think that we were presented with. I think when I looked at just ways of working in the corporate side, so in your office environment, just trying to figure out, okay, do you come to work? Do you not come to work? What's the timeline? What are the rules? How much flexibility? All at the same time trying to reconcile the reality of that there is the majority of your business that does not have that option, right? So we are a manufacturing organization, we're mining, we're mining dirt, we're manufacturing our products. That doesn't stop. And so at the same time, trying to balance the corporate side and your office environment versus your manufacturing side was extremely complex. And then also trying to figure out how do you balance all of the all of the requirements, all of the, protocols. And then when you kind of layer on every world area is at a different level of kind of maturity and understanding of what's happening. You have government regulations that are coming on top that are saying do X, Y, and Z. So, I think for us at Tronox, it has been a very, kind of complex thing to manage because you want to do what's right for your employees. You want to do what's right for the business, all while there's so many different inputs and variables kind of coming at you at the same time. And so I think one of the biggest things is just being flexible and being okay with making a decision today, knowing that that might change next week. And I think that's really hard as, business professionals, as leaders. Oftentimes you spend a lot of time putting together your plan, your strategy, your crisis kind of plan, and knowing that it's such a fluid way of operating nowadays that it's hard as a leader to it really tests you, in your decision making and your thought process around what's right or wrong. So I think, I would say that my biggest takeaway right now is just even thinking just ways of working. How do you work? How do you adjust? So was probably one of our biggest things that we had to really get our hands around and getting the information, at the time that you need it to make the right types of decisions to inform. So I'll pause. I don't want to hijack the conversation, but
No,
it's a tough
no, I mean,
one.
and that was one that we could talk about forever because I think that it requires a level of agility that we haven't had to use so quickly and or access so quickly in
Right.
our workspaces. It's kind of like things are changing all the time, and I think one of the things I take away from that for sure is the decision that you make today may be something different tomorrow, right? For sure. Which brings me on to
Like
you, Alan. I
literally
mean,
tomorrow.
no, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And Alan, that brings me to you, particularly around the real estate thing. I mean, I've been looking for you for years. I mean, for the last year and a half, or someone like you, because I mean, you sit firmly in the commercial real estate space. You'll understand a lot of the different things that are happening. But what I really want to talk about is, we're thinking about safety. We're talking about these blended models. Things are shifting and changing. I really want to talk about innovation, though, because I think that we're all kind of focused on the oh my gosh of this and not the opportunity in it. And I think it's particularly from a real estate perspective where you're seeing the landscape move and change so quickly. We'd just love to get your thoughts on some of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and what you think some of the opportunities might be.
Well, the landscape is not landscaping, but the landscape is changing very, very quickly. There's no question about that. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate being on this panel very much and speaking of this topic. Innovation is happening very, very fast right in front of our eyes relative to our getting back to work and the built environment and how the relationship between the human beings that occupy the space and the built environment, how that relationship will look in the future is changing really, really quickly. I think one of the best things that we're seeing globally about this is buildings that are under development right now, and I'm specifically talking about office buildings. We've seen a complete pivot from corporations globally building buildings that looked, performed, felt, smell like they did back 20 years ago to ones that are more sustainable, that ones that have greater emphasis on health, wellness, safety, collaborative space, better air, touchless environments. So the technology that was under development pre-COVID is now being injected into millions and millions of square feet of office spaces that are being built around the world right now, and these they're accelerating their response to as I say health and wellness, sustainability. So we're building a better world a lot quicker. And JLL, I'm sure you've heard this before, but we have billions of square feet of buildings like this under management, and it's giving us a better opportunity to accelerate our own purpose, which is a little bit innovative as well, which obviously is to shape the future of real estate for a better world. We are on that journey, and now we have a whole bunch of motivated investors and building owners saying, my building might not be competitive for this future return to work world. What do we need to do? Well, this is where you inject your technology really quickly right now during COVID to respond to the return to work. So we're seeing billions of dollars of innovation in technology at the building level being injected into buildings under development right now and buildings that are being converted to respond to a better world and a healthier world for the human beings that are occupying the space. So from that perspective, and to your point, let's stop talking a little bit about, oh my goodness, I wish this never happened, and start looking at all the good things that have accelerated for the benefit of humankind when we all return back.
Yeah, I mean, that acceleration is really something. I mean, we've been having these conversations about ESG, and a lot in all of our organizations. And this absolutely has accelerated that to some extent, which we would have never done this quickly in terms of the kinds of changes that are being made had it not been for a precipitating event to get us there so quickly. I mean, the quantum change in terms of our behaviors has really, really shifted. And you mentioned tech. So I'm going to jump over to you, Naveen, because you sit firmly in the tech space and I'm curious just about you have a global responsibility for both operational and technology teams. What are some of the pressures that tech organizations are facing? I mean, everybody went off site very quickly. That's one thing. But what are the things that you're thinking about with entirely remote staff? I know you could do that to some extent, but both operationally and from a regulatory perspective, even if you kind of bring that into the frame.
Yeah, great question, right? So I'll pick up where Alan left off. As the technology enthusiast in all of us, we have to look at this as an opportunity to figure out how we can evolve businesses, right? So I support a wholesale bank, a trading floor, in 5 regions, and the fact that we had to move everybody off to work from home has never been done before. It's never been heard of before to move trading floors to work from home, and so that helped us develop new muscles. We had to put in surveillance. We had to monitor people from home. So it's still a very heavily regulated business that needed technology to help bridge the pandemic and being able to sustain business. And so as we look at some of the pressures is in many folds. So we've got our business. We're anxious to somewhat get back to the office. And so then we have opportunities to make that transition back safe, right? And that's working in partnership with Alan talked about some of our real estate partners in adopting some of those things and helping us be ready for that versus trying to solve for it ourselves, right? And then there's a cluster of folks who want to continue working from home, right? And so how do we enable them to have technology that fits seamlessly with the folks that have aspirations to come back to the office? And then finally, what does our disaster recovery and business continuity plans look like after all of this? Where do we have to invest? Do I really need the disaster recovery centers, or do I just let people go home with laptops if something were to happen again? Right. So from a technology perspective, we're almost looking at multiple pressures, right? Is I've got our business lines who are saying, hey, look, when can I invite people back to the office? When can I bring clients back to the office? And how do I get tooling to reserve seats? And so there's an increase in high demand on technology to step up to solve some of these problems. Um, at the same time, we have to be mindful of how much to give because there's the data protection. We're heavily regulated. How much do I allow you to access stuff while now you're in transit? And so there is a lot of opportunities here. Unfortunately, there's a lot of companies coming up with solutions, right? So, we're continuing to reinvent what it means to use WebEx and Zoom and other partners in that space. How do we use cloud to move data around safely? How do we, um, and I think we talked about earlier, how do we make people check in when they come into the office a seamless process and safe, right? So I think, and then what kind of tools do we continue refreshing for people who work from home with their aging gear, right? And so all of these things are new puzzles for us to put together. And and the pressure is really around also looking at how other banks are gearing up to come back, right? So the competitive nature of it is okay, what are the tier one banks doing? What are the different regions doing? Who are the service providers they're using? And so we're all trying to figure this out. It's not an easy problem. We have a lot of technology enthusiasts who are willing to onboard and do some stuff. And then we've got legacy bankers who we have to bring along this journey. And so there's a bit of both, right? And so this is a perfect opportunity, as my colleague said, we have to change the game. This is a game changer.
It is. It is such a game changer. And, it's really interesting because as you were saying that, I was listening, to just kind of thinking about everything that all of you have said, right? And I think one of the things that's interesting is the assumption that people don't want to come back into the office because there are lots of people who do, right? And I think it's human nature to want to kind of see people and touch and feel. And, there are cues that you miss. And we talked about this morning with Rick. There are cues that you miss that you just can't get. Now there are folks who may not want to be, but I think the key thing that's emerging is flexibility. What folks want is flexibility. It's not a matter of not coming into the office. They want flexibility around the how, what, and when, perhaps, which I think poses a really challenging issue for leaders because it makes it much harder to forecast what you'll need and when you'll need it, right? And Alan, I'm sure that's something that you'll be seeing from a real estate perspective. We'll come to that in a moment, but I would like to interject a question from the chat, which was really interesting. And I think one that's very topical, and that's, and I was talking about this earlier. The person says, I'm curious to hear how companies plan to deal with people that do not want to be vaccinated. Will they be allowed in the workplace moving forward? And I think that's a debate. That's a big debate question, right? And I was saying that I'm going to a meeting next week in another city, and the leadership team there said that anybody who comes into the building has to be vaccinated, right? And I think that's a real challenge because what does that mean? And I'm not asking you to make decisions. And I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of your companies, but just kind of your views on some of the things that you're having to navigate as you think about that for your businesses. I'll kick that over to Ellie. Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I was yeah, because it was a topic we were just talking about today, actually. So, and I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, to be honest with you, especially for a company like ourselves that's a global nature, right? So, for us, we have followed the logic, as far as CDC regulations, what they're advising, kind of from the top. And we look at all the world areas that we operate in and kind of understanding what are the government regulations just to make sure that we align with that. But then you also have to think kind of in a more intimate way, like if we look at the US, for instance, there's complexities in saying, do we get vaccinated? Do we not? How do you monitor if someone doesn't? What are going to be the restrictions? What if someone wears masks? And, what's the behavioral element to it? I mean, there's so many kind of layers that start to compound on the question. And so right now, our stance is really around education and educating people so they understand what options they have so they can make the best decision for them and aligning that with, the government kind of legal regulations that are taking place right now. We continue to operate in safe environments. We continue to have, the social distancing, where masks are required, we manage that. So, and again, this is one of those areas where I mentioned we have to be flexible because the policy might change next week, right? Based on what's happening in the world. And so I think us just being comfortable about that reality. So, I'll say that, it's a constant conversation. It's a constant conversation around what's the right thing to do. How do you manage it? And just asking a lot of questions. And I would offer up even asking our employees. We've done a lot of listening around what their comfort level is, what they expect of us as an organization, what do they want to see when they come back. Because at the end of the day, it's hard to always make decisions on behalf of the broader. In the past, you have so many data inputs or your industry, how to make decisions based on your practice and what you typically done. But now the world that we live in today, it doesn't matter if I'm chemicals, it doesn't matter if you're tech, it doesn't matter if you're, the Googles of the world or, CPG, everybody's dealing with this. So now our employees are not only comparing ourselves to our sector, but they're looking at everything and what environment. So it's almost like you have to have a broader perspective of how to manage your workforce and manage, the day to day, because your employees are just as smart and sometimes maybe even smarter on the latest and greatest of what's happening and what they expect to see when they come back to work. So just a couple thoughts there.
No, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, Alan and Naveen, because one of the things that I think is has shifted quite significantly from when I think about my time coming into the late '80s, coming into business, was that now people can get things on their fingertips because they have this thing on this thing in the palm of their hand, right? And they have access to information and different things very quickly. When I remember, for me, I had to wait for my mom to come home to take me to the library, and if I had change for a copier, I could make copies. Otherwise, I was writing it down, and then I forgot something and I had to go back. So the access to information also kind of shifts that game, right? It shifts that process because people are almost getting access to information as quickly as the leaders are, right? And I mean, in terms of this kind of emerging environment. I know Alan or Naveen, Alan, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are around kind of this space and where we might be going.
It's like we spoke a little bit earlier, where it's an acceleration play, right? So um, what was going on probably 6 or 7 years prior to COVID relative to the physical relationship between the employees and the space that was being rented or owned by the employer was a move towards more agile work solutions. And the reason for that is that corporations were hearing this desire for flexibility. And so this didn't just happen during COVID. This has been going on for quite some time. So why were they listening to their employees? Because they started getting into engagement scoring so that they could find rooms for improvement. Why are they trying to improve? Well, they're not just trying to improve the bottom line, but they're trying to improve the war for talent, which is a war for attracting the best employees and retaining and developing the best employees as well. So this is something that was already in place. All of a sudden, COVID kicks in. We have in Canada, Naveen will back me up on this. I mean, we're really not fully back to work. We probably won't be fully back into office spaces until after Labor Day, the beginning of September. So we've had a long, very, very elongated period of time for humans to gain adjustment to working from a home environment. Yeah, the technology with the phones and whatnot have helped, but during this period of time, we've now had to go into the employees and offer them an option so that not everybody quits our organization or their organization and goes to work for somewhere else just because they're desiring change and they're starting to search out for companies that allow them to work from home. So that 20 or 30% of people that prefer the flexibility or prefer working from home, they were never offered the option before. They were never asked the question. And now they've got a very, very loud voice, and corporations have to listen to it, because if we don't, there's going to be so much human movement between corporations coming up in the next 1 to 2 years by those people who, not only the people who are being forced back into the office and didn't want to, but the people who want to get back into the office. And when they go there, they find that there's only 15 people as opposed to the 150 that used to be there. And that's disappointing them. So there's a whole bunch of risk associated with how we go about doing this. And I think, as somebody else said before, Elizabeth, I think it was you, there's no one rule book as to how to do this correctly. I was using this metaphor with you earlier, Andy. Right now, what's going on is, if you can tell a little story and everybody can visualize, walking into your garage and having a box full of golf balls, and then you walk out onto your driveway and you throw the golf balls up in the air. So where are we right now? Where are the golf balls? Well, half of them have hit the ground and they've gone in 400 different directions and they're landing in different spots. The other half haven't even hit the ground yet. There's no prediction as to where they're going to be. And that's exactly where we're finding ourselves right now, trying to predict where golf balls are going to land after they hit the ground. And CEOs and C-suite members that I speak to, because we represent a whole bunch of these corporations and we have contracts with them, obviously, the things that the one common element they're all very, very aware of and trying to solve for, obviously, is the health and well-being and safety of their employees. That's universal. That's the one thing we can say. Everybody's landing and ticking that box. The other thing that they're not talking about quite as much, but they will say this privately, is they feel that this whole thing has been a bit of an attack on and put at risk, the purpose of the organization, the culture of the organization, its values, its identity. And most of these corporations have worked really, really, really hard leading up to COVID to get that right. And I think if you ask any CEO before COVID start, they would say, yeah, I think we're 80 or 90 or 95% there on our world of continuous improvement to get our culture correct, to get our identity correct. Who are we? What do we stand for? Where are we going? Why are we going in that direction? What does success look like? All of a sudden, COVID kicks in and it attacks all of that. And that's really what we're trying to solve for at the C-suite right now. And nobody has the answer other than the fact that we got to keep our people alive. We got to try to make sure that their jobs are secure. And then in priority number 3, we have to service our clients. Because if our people die, can't service the clients, and of course we'll have not done a proper job. If we fire everybody in order to protect our balance sheet, well, that's just a weak organization, quite frankly. That's the easy way out, and it's not a sustainable long-term way of dealing with this. And if we get the first 2 correct, we're most likely in a better place to be able to service the clients, which is ultimately what the purpose of the organization stands for. I'm not just talking about JLL, I'm talking about all organizations. Sorry for the long speech there, but
Oh my gosh, there were so many gems
No, but
there.
I know there's so many nuggets. I was just going to say, it's interesting, the comment that you had made about, just talent in general earlier on. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities or complexities that we're dealing with too. Like, employees are definitely listening to what's happening in your organization. And now that there's so much flexibility and so many options for people to go, how do you make sure you keep that company culture that people have tried to work so hard to, in a world where people can jump in and go do something else if they don't like it, because now everybody's kind of in this virtual. So it's almost unlocked so much opportunity for the talent. And it's created that, kind of situation for organizations on how do you maintain that value. We were just having a conversation a couple weeks ago around, what does onboarding even look like for employees? If I'm no longer going to go and experience that feel in touch of what your values are in your organization, I'm just on a Zoom call. How does someone capture that loyalty, and how does someone really get the essence of what that company stands for, right? So all I'm saying is I hear you loud and clear on just where organizations might feel conflicted of how do you balance all of that? Because those are questions we're thinking about. Do you fly people into a certain location? Do you do a Zoom call? Do you make them come somewhere for a month? What does training look like now? I mean, all those things it really has really challenged organizations across the entire board of how do you operate internally to drive that value, and that your company is set to make. So a lot of questions, not a lot of answers for
No,
sure.
truly. Truly, and that kind of leads me to, there was another question that somebody put forward to me, and that is perfect because your our panel colleagues opened this up for you, and that's kind of, how do you keep employees engaged remotely who are remote, even between now and September, or now when people are coming back into the office, like that culture thing is a really hard thing to shift. It's a really hard thing to no, not shift. It's a really hard thing to recreate remotely, right? Because people aren't feeling the culture of your organization necessarily in their home. There are lots of people who have started working at new organizations during the pandemic and have never met anybody face to face, right? So you have that too. So how do you keep employees engaged? What are some of the things that you're thinking about around how you keep folks engaged while they're remote, and how we might do that longer term when you talk about the technology play that you did around creating technology for them to be able to be remote? What does the rest of that look like?
Another great question, right? I just want to go back to the question before and just add a couple of things. What I enjoy, and thank you for the person submitting that question on vaccination, is, and we get these questions all the time. Every listening tour I've been on, the questions are always so direct. Will you make us get vaccinated? Will you make us come back 5 days a week? Will you allow us to work somewhere else? And I always remind people, we're all in this movie together, and we haven't written the ending, right? And so it all depends, right? So a lot of it I want people to take away and saying, and I think Alan hit on this, is we're still in the thought process. We know what outcomes we want to achieve. We're trying to uphold the culture and the values we've built all these years. Let's check box health and safety as number one. But then where do we posture? What are we signaling? And to the earlier point, is it's about education, right? So how do we signal to you what we think is a safe protocol by educating everybody? We set up pop-up clinics to give people easeability if they wanted to get vaccinated. We gave them time off to, to take off after vaccination. And so each of these we're learning on the fly, working with our chief medical officer and everybody else on what is the posture we want to take. And so as we go through this journey of, will you make me Naveen? Will you have this due to me? And I tell everybody, the honest answer is, I don't know. I think when we keep our principles in mind, we're trying to be as flexible. We work this out. So I love those questions because I would be too, trying to figure out the ending to this movie, right? Is, are we all going to go back? Will you make us come back? Will you get us this, right? And so I think that was a great question, and the other panelists were spot on. The second question around engagement, I think that is the tough thing we're dealing with, right? The first 3, 4 months was Zoom celebration. We did virtual events, online parties, you name it, games, and then slowly there's fatigue, right? And it's about, I don't know if I want to spend my summer months having a virtual drink with my bosses, and I'd rather be away from. So we've been learning through the process of how we engage our colleagues, right? How do we do things that are critical in our business, like apprenticeship over video? How do we celebrate successes? How do we um, do strategy things? How do we dialogue with someone in need, right? So the things that worked for us is really creating a culture of checking in, right? So we encourage everybody to have at least a check-in video on or off, to be able to feel the pulse of everybody in our teams. We try and do virtual hangouts, right? Not to a fatiguing point, but we try to have an open virtual hangout where people can drop in. And then we encourage deep networking. Um, the opportunities that the pandemic has in terms of connecting people to other people is like no other, right? Here we are on a panel, meeting people that otherwise would have been coordinated to go somewhere, but through the pandemic, I've met so many people, um, which was so much easier than it could have ever been done. So we encourage people to leverage some of the technology to network, to reach out. And so for us, it's how do we give them the right tools? How do we create a playbook to help managers deal with checking in folks. So we haven't quite figured it out, India, but we're practicing different things. We're trying to do fun events. We're trying to bring um, leaders to have conversations and balance not the video fatigue along that way.
It's, I mean, that
Yeah,
you have, go ahead, Ellie, please.
oh no, I was just gonna just offer up a couple other suggestions because I'm laughing at the Zoom fatigue, and I don't want to have another happy hour with my boss because I think I definitely got there in a previous organization. We did a lot of that. It was good intended, but I think one of the things I would offer up is actually being creative while you're on the call. So one of the unique things that we do here at Tronox is we start every meeting when there's more than two or three people with the safety share to keep safety and wellness kind of top of mind. It's part of our culture and who we are. And it comes up a lot, this concept around wellness and, standing and whatnot. And it's gotten to the point where if someone's coming off the elliptical from working out and they show up a little sweaty on the call, like accepting that, because we're working probably more hours than we have in extended periods of time. If I'm in the office, I might stop, go grab a cup of coffee. So I'm resting my brain, I'm moving my legs. But when I'm at home, it's like hop off one call to get to another call to get off another call. So, I've already even started to open up. Listen, if I might be on my treadmill while we're on the call, just to even create a different sense of wellness and kind of engagement. So I think we need to probably, where it's possible and where the opportunities allow and where it's safe, to see how can we bring a different energy to the table so that we provide kind of new norms in operating. Another thing that I thought was really exciting to see as I joined this organization is just this visible felt leadership that we have as an organization as well. We were doing a recognition, from for our organization and for some employees, and our CEOs kind of popped in the meeting. So think if you're just in a Zoom call and you think, oh, my boss is giving me recognition, but even our CEOs popped in. So it's, even trying to find creative ways to interject new people in a call, having that visible felt leadership and engagement so that it feels like a different experience, I think is important. So those are just a couple things beyond the happy hours. I'm trying to organize one now, but globally it's really hard. It's either mimosas or wine, you got to figure that out. But, I think there's a lot to be said about thinking outside of the box or allowing different types of behavior, like working out on a meeting to really provide a better work environment.
For sure. I mean, like, I tell people now, I mean, like, and I hadn't been doing this, but over the last maybe month or two, I'm like, let's just do a call. Let's just talk. I don't need to see you. I mean, like, I want to see people, but sometimes I'm like, let's just do the phone and I'll go out and walk while I'm talking to people, or it's the wellness thing. I might not, people can't see me on the treadmill necessarily, but I definitely will go outside and walk while I'm working. And I think, that's just, I mean, that whole kind of wellness piece is huge. And that brings me on, as I'd like to take a slight pivot for a second, because, again, Alan, having you here particularly focused on real estate, which is, I think, one of the biggest concerns or questions people have. How do we manage our real estate portfolios in the current environment? We have leases, we don't have leases, whatever it might be. And it's kind of like, there were lots of companies who allowed their leases to run out, which I'm not sure is necessarily, this is my personal view, the best idea, just considering the fact that I think that there may be more people who want to return longer term than not, but that's another story for another time. But do you think that that any surplus is temporary, like the surplus in real estate that could come available as people terminate leases? Do you think that's a temporary thing? And if so, and if not, are there some opportunities to repurpose space or use them in different ways than maybe we traditionally have?
So the quick answer is yes. Our take is that it is temporary, but here are some of the conditions and variables at play. It really does depend on the health of where those office buildings are. So I'll use Toronto downtown market as an example. I mean, we went into this pandemic with a vacancy rate under 2%. So have companies given back some space and increased it up to 5 or 6%? Yes. What's also happened is many of the companies who've tried to put idle, what's called sublet space onto the market to save a little bit of money, they've really done it more from an economic saving standpoint. If you run the DNA of all the companies that put the space on the market to try to save some money, they were trying to save some money. It's not that they made a workplace change. It was an economic driven decision. What's interesting now is that, as we start to get back into the offices again here in Canada, a vast majority of that space that had previously been put on the market as a test to find out if they were takers and if companies could save some money is being taken back off the market. And the corporations are planning to reoccupy that space that they tested to try to unload in order to save money for their balance sheet. So the geography is critical. And let me just compare Toronto to Calgary. So Toronto had less than 2% office vacancy going into COVID, and obviously has increased just a little bit as new product has hit the market that hasn't been leased. So nobody wants to make a decision during COVID right now, and some sublet space that's been put on the market. Look at Calgary. Calgary went into COVID at 32% vacancy in their downtown core because the oil and liquid natural gas industry that drives Calgary's economy had really been hurt heavily over the last 5 years. And then all of a sudden, pardon the expression, but you pour gasoline on top of a fire that's already burning, and it's just gone a little bit nuts. So that market may not be as temporary relative to your question about, is it temporary and will it get reabsorbed? And then again, let's jump physically back to Toronto. You have 250,000 people immigrating into the city of Toronto every year. They're highly educated. They're looking to occupy tech jobs for the most place. Naveen would know this better than anybody on this call, because the tech industry in Canada is booming. The cost of operating a tech business in, say, a city like Toronto against San Francisco is a lot more economical. The dollar is cheaper. Obviously, occupying space is cheaper. The cost of living is cheaper. There's really, really good medical help for all of its citizens. I could go on and on with all the benefits, but that is going to cause the reabsorption of that vacant space you're referring to in that marketplace. That's going to cause that to happen very, very quickly. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 24 months we're right back down to 2% vacancy in Toronto. Again, Calgary or another market like Calgary globally for other people around the world who are listening in, that's going to take a lot longer to reabsorb and get that back to a healthy space for sure. I think the overriding message here is those who decided not to renew or allow their leases to lapse or put vacant space in their office on the market to try to sublet, we're finding many of them are regretting those decisions. And then there's the other overarching theme is that the majority of companies, their lease is not up right now. They could have 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 years left on an existing lease. So no matter what they want to do, structurally, they're stuck with paying the rent to the landlord in a lease contract that they can't really get out of. So those are the ones who are now turning around to say, okay, we can't get out of that structural cost. However, what should we do to redesign the interior of our space to try to make it a healthier, more productive, collaborative, enhancing of our culture opportunity? So that's another discussion that's going on, really. And so the space planners, the workplace consultants, they're making a lot of money right now, and they're busier than they'll probably ever be in the history of humankind, trying to reimagine the interior physical space of existing offices where people can't get out of leases in order to try to bring the people back to work and make it more productive and healthier for them as well.
Awesome. I mean, it's that process. I think what's really interesting. The kind of couple of things that stood out to me that you said was one that a lot of the folks who made the choices to sublet or come out did so for economic reasons as opposed to anything else, which is really interesting. I think that was a big aha moment for me for a minute, because I think it's easy to assume that they did it for other reasons, right? They wouldn't need the space anymore or whatever it might be, and actually because of hybrid working or whatever, because people weren't going to come back, and actually to hear that it's actually more economically driven is a really interesting point and something to think about and ponder, and the regret that folks have for having made those decisions too quickly. Because I would assume that particularly, as people are coming back into the market, I mean, people are coming back into the market, that getting space back, if it wasn't a sublet, could also be challenging, right? As things start to kick off again, right? Getting the right space back could be something that could be a real challenge too. So those are really interesting things to that are on the radar now that I now have to think about in terms of myself. I didn't come out of a lease, but just in terms of some of the people that I work with, I think I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about some of the behaviors that we saw. There was a question in the chat, and I'll preface it by saying some of the behaviors that we saw around empathy really shifted during this time, and how employers showed up for their people. And whilst there were complaints about this, that, and the other, the reality is, all of us were shaken to some extent by things that have happened, and the level of empathy that organization showed was very different than many had previously seen. And so there's a question that came up: how do you ensure your organization doesn't forget the lessons of the past 18 months? It feels like some organizations have already begun to revert back to unempathetic and inequitable practices. And there's that fatigue, it feels like, for in some spaces. I'd love to get your views on that, Naveen, just kind of thinking about that. What does that look like?
Yeah, again, another great question, right? And I go back to what Alan said. The theme for all of us is imagine, reimagine, right? Is we're coming back to something from a culture and a structure perspective, but hopefully empathy, care, and well-being are built into our values. So it's still the foundation of what I think all of us are about. The question is, um, how do we recalibrate not so much to the what and why, but the how, right? How do we show empathy differently? How do we do that through enabling flexibility? How do we um, celebrate differently? How do we listen in more to evolving challenges around coming back or working from home? How do we be empathetic to making sure we enable teams to communicate effectively still? How do we promote people? How do we pay people? How do we recruit talent? Where do we continue to push? I mean, part of working in this environment is we also went borderless. We went looking for talent in places they otherwise wouldn't. How do we continue those behaviors? How do we continue to show through our diversity slate of keeping this going? How do we keep momentum? So all of those things, India, I think are topical to us, and we're making sure that the what and why still holds, but how we execute is going to be on the combination of pushing it down to the executives and the people managers. And we're doing more things. We're looking at how we do year-end evaluations, right? How do you evaluate differently? Maybe it's a condensed version that's done quarterly. We're rethinking our pulse strategy, right? How do we get feedback back from the 87,000 colleagues on our platform? How do we hear from the new cohorts, right? The pipeline, the people coming in, and equally the people exiting our platform. I'm equally interested in knowing why they're leaving. What have we gone wrong? Where do they feel pressured? Where do they feel like we're not showing up for them? And so, to answer your question, I think to revert back is dangerous, and we're very alert in seeing the signals that certain departments, people, managers are giving, and making sure that we work closely with our people and the HR partners to calibrate policies where we need, um, learn about new situations we'd never dealt with before, right? And we're adjusting the way we comp people, the way we give time off, the way we're giving stress leaves, all anchored off of making sure health and safety and well-being still topical. The number of folks who've got to take care of people in their lives, who've got higher risk people living at home with them, like all of these things are now factors in what you do day to day. And so for us, it's just being alert, doing more listening tours, educating our people managers to think differently, watching our who we promote, how do we reward, how's the pipeline looking, and getting trusted advisors to coach us through it.
I think what's really interesting is that we kind of have this. I'm thinking about, as I was listening to you and just thinking about the question. When I think about the conversations that I'm having primarily with people who are in the rank and file of organizations, staff, people who are in organizations, I think the concern, honestly, is around what this moment will look like for underrepresented groups who we're talking about now that we didn't talk about before, right? And so tomorrow afternoon, the finale of the Town Hall Summit is a conversation with Indigenous people from around the world, from Canada, from North America, from New Zealand, and from Australia, about their relationship with business and what that means from a sustainability perspective, but also a pipeline perspective. And so I think, we've been starting to have those conversations a lot more. Like I think in the US, it's been around Black people and people of color. In Canada, the same, but also the Indigenous population there. And so, I think that's the worry that I think folks have is, will those conversations stop? Which I think is one of the things. The other thing is, just to kind of close that point out, is that, one of the issues Alan mentioned earlier, that a number of CEOs they're thinking about kind of, how do we maintain our cultures? What are they want folks to come back partially because of that. But here's one of the other things, is that there are people that won't necessarily. I've made myself a couple notes so I wouldn't forget. There are some people that won't necessarily come back to the office in the same way. And here's the issue. One of the things that I've been experiencing, that I've been having conversations with some of my colleagues about, who sit in C-suite offices, was they wanted people to come back partially because their strategies are eroded around low-cost locations. Because if you have people who are, if you have people in low-cost locations, and then suddenly people in New York can now work from home and everybody's at home, then how do you say to people, and this is about the equity question. I'm not going to get into the detail of it, but I'm saying this as a statement as opposed to a question. But how then do you tell somebody in India that I'm going to pay you less than somebody in New York when you're both at home? And so that is, this evolving landscape of change for leaders is really challenging all the time. And we're always thinking about it and always thinking about it. I would love to, if you wouldn't mind, each of you, I'd love to ask each of you a question about your respective spaces and places, the industries that you work in, and the functions that you have. So I would say, the question is going to be around what you would tell somebody, like Elizabeth, in HR. What would you tell an HR professional who's trying to find their way through this, just around your philosophy, around how you're thinking about navigating? And the same thing for you, Alan. When you think about the commercial real estate space and leaders who sit in that space, what would you tell them to think about? And one of the things you said was, the thing I talked about, the kind of economic piece of that, don't make decisions rashly. But, what would you tell folks? And then, Naveen, when you think about people who are having to think about technology and how they're going to have to manage it, who sit in seats like yours, what piece of advice would you give them? So I'm gonna kick off and start with you, Ellie. I'd love to hear your thoughts around, kind of HR professionals.
Yeah. So I would say, if I was talking to another HR professional and they asked me, what should I be thinking about? What should I be doing this time? And I would say, listen, we're the department that services the people so that the organization can thrive, right? And so it's really important to listen to your employees, listen to the needs of your leadership teams, and help be that advocate and that kind of coach, through the situation, and giving people the space to kind of digest and understand what they need to do. So I would say that would be one piece, and recognizing that you might not always have the answers, but come prepared to ask a lot of questions to help the leaders get to where they need to be. I would say, it's our responsibility to challenge the organization to think differently, right? At the end of the day, we're all going through change. There's almost more change that we could probably even ever think, comprehensible. But how can you challenge leaders to, kind of get on board? And I would also say, educate yourself. At the end of the day, I think as HR professionals, we spend a lot of time trying to educate and do leadership development and succession planning and comp strategies, and helping with org design. And a lot of times we don't take the space to really educate ourselves to help become a better advocate, teacher, coach, etc. And I'm a huge advocate of, continuous learning. And so I would say, continue to learn even outside of your sector, the business, so that you can help provide the support during these times. And I think the last one I would say is, be transparent. I've always, been a person where, I will tell you if I know, I will tell you if I don't know, I will tell you if I need to go figure it out. And I think in these situations where we're all trying to figure it out together, it's okay to be transparent and say, listen, we got to figure it out together, or we have to learn together, or you have to trust me that I might have to pivot in my decision making. And so transparency where possible, I think, is also important. So those are some nuggets I think I would share to my HR colleagues. Yeah.
Thank you. Alan, over to you.
Well, being in a leadership role, JLO myself, I'd be speaking. This question would be aimed at some of my peers who are leaders in other organizations. And if I were If I were you and I were coaching them from the experience that I personally have gone through in the last 15 months, there's probably 8 or 9 pillars of goodies that are nuggets, as you called them earlier, that I would pass on to them had they not experienced this, or if they're looking to try to have success going forward. And I would suggest to them, and much along the lines of what Ellie said as well, very similar sort of themes, but as a leader, help define what success looks like for your team and communicate it effectively so that everybody knows, like, okay, that's where we're going and that's why we're going there and that's what success looks like. So help define what that success looks like for everybody, and then work hard at creating the environment for reaching that successful outcome. That's part of your job as well, needless to say. And then, and this is, I think, where organizations need to evolve really, really quickly. And it does speak to diversity as well, but leverage the intellect of the team and solicit their voices. I think gone are the days where a 55-year-old white guy in a suit and tie like me knows everything. Organizations that still operate that way and leaders that still think that way, those companies move way too slow, and they make bad decisions because they're not delving into the diverse experiences of a wider group of people. So leverage the intellects of the team, solicit their voices, and when they come to you and they tell you something and they make a recommendation for the organization that doesn't feel right, it feels foreign because you haven't ever done it before, trust them. And that's what's under attack here, probably more than anything else, as it relates to this virtual work environment going forward. Is no longer our leaders going to be able to walk a trading floor and being able to understand this and see everybody there working 12 hours a day and feel comfortable and confident that people are working. You got to trust that when they're home or when they're working in a spoke model away from the head office, they're actually getting their work done. So trust the team, encourage their curiosity, solicit their voices, encourage their curiosity, and then once you've done all that sort of stuff, your other big job as a leader, I would tell these people, eliminate interferences. Take away things, stop doing things, stop thinking old ways that are actually detrimental to a very, very accelerating, fluid future. Part of your big job is to stop all that stuff that's getting in the way of your people's success. So listen to them, as Ellie said, and actually eliminate those interferences. And then, again, on the lines of what Ellie said as well, very, very important now and for the future for leadership in general, in my opinion, to completely bring your authentic self to the table 100% of the time. Don't be embarrassed by the fact that you as a leader might be having tremendous anxiety over the situation that you're dealt with. It's not your fault. We're all human beings together. There have been 2 times over the last 16 months where I've been on town halls in front of 1,500 JLLers across the country where, because of the subject matter and the topic and the stress and the duress that this has brought on, I've shed tears because it called for it. And it wasn't an act. It was because I felt that way, because the stress was overwhelming of some of the things that we're doing. And quite frankly, I do believe that if you really want to engage your people as a leader, you have to be completely authentic and you got to be vulnerable to tell them really what's going on in your own personal life a little bit. And that makes them feel like they have a better, deeper connection, and it makes them feel like they work in a more authentic environment. And those people are much more likely to be engaged, and engaged employees give tertiary effort that turns into accretive value for your clients. It's not complicated. So those are the things I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. Naveen, last but not least, of
Yeah,
course.
how do I go after the two wonderful panelists on with me? So I would say, look, my advice would be make decisions in the best interests of the company, the shareholders, and the mission first, right? So I think Alan opened up the call and saying we're all here to service our clients, our customers. We're in business, and so when in doubt, always connect the dots to what it means for our customer. What does it mean for our client? What does it mean for the commitments we've made to the board or to the shareholders? Second of all, it's all about people, right? We're in the people business. It doesn't matter what we sell. It's really about the people. So themes like building trust, empathy, being open and honest, being inclusive, those things more than ever matter, right? They matter because the pandemic has opened up a lot of eyes to the world where we work, where does work sit in the grand scheme of our lives, what are our priorities. All of these things are now on people's radar more than ever. They're not distracted with the rustle bustle of getting to work daily, being there. Now they're in their homes thinking about some of these things and reevaluating their value proposition. So let's show up as leaders to show them that we do care about their well-being, that we are empathetic to what they're going on at home. We do want to help them through situations and work in open trust relationships. And lastly, for me, is invest in people, right? Just because we're in a pandemic doesn't mean we can't improve further educations, training. Um, there are assets. So, the number of voluntarily people stop going to courses, education. I don't know who told them not to, but this notion that we can't spend money, right? So let us be leaders, encourage people to continue to educate, train, and come out of this pandemic stronger and better, right? So those are probably the three things I would leave behind in saying, think about mission, the company first, um, build an honest, open relationship with the people around you, and then don't stop to invest in the next generation training, education, and maybe as a fourth plug, embrace technology, right? It's here. It's in every sense of the word, going to impact everything we do. And so embrace what technology is about to do, and have fun with it.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask you all in your last closing word. It's a very simple one to show your vulnerability. Don't worry, it's not going to get too crazy here. But I want people to know who you are a little bit. So my your last question, which is only a very short one, because I want people to know who they're dealing with here, because this tells a lot. Is your favorite song? Haha, you didn't see that one coming, did you? And because I'm going to make, and I decided this. On the fly that I'm going to make the Town Hall Summit playlist out of the songs that people have given us that are their favorites. So just so we can know a little bit about who you are, your song, Alan, your song. What's your song?
Respect by Aretha Franklin. Easy one.
Respect by Aretha. That's easy, easy peasy. Awesome, Ellie.
Oh, this is so tough. I would say one of my favorites is "Kiss of Life" by Sade.
I like that one too. Naveen.
Yeah, my go-to song is "Yellow" by Coldplay.
Awesome. Okay,
Oh,
so we have
good
some really
one.
good songs for our list. I will just say thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. So you all will have to go and look for the Town Hall Summit playlist because these songs will be there. I made that up, but I think that I'm going to have to do this now for sure because now I've committed to it. But
No, it's a
honestly,
cool idea.
it's a kind of interesting one, right? It came to me as I was thinking of when Alan, when you said, you have to show your vulnerability and show who you are. I was like, how do we get folks to know people? And that is such a great way because music says so much about who people are. For me, it's going to be some Stevie Wonder song for sure. He is like my favorite, so I'll make sure that's the one that goes in for me. But I just want to say thank you, to the three of you. You're very busy leaders who are really navigating a really uncertain time and I appreciate that you've come and spent this time with us, but also, that people can actually hear the things that we have to think about, the things that you're having to think about in your everyday as it stands. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you again to the three of you. I hope that you'll get to watch some more of the summit. We have a full day tomorrow coming. Um, it's been a tremendous time, and I've learned a lot. I have my little notes I've scribbled down that I will be using and applying in my daily lives. But thank you all. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.